Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird, true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. This is my weekly compendium for the week ending Monday, March 7th, 2022. Case file number 541, written by Nevron14, Lines Between Life and Death. I work at a financial institution, and as part of my role, I coordinate training for all new hires within the first few weeks of their onboarding. The process begins when local managers send me the names and contact details of the new hirees so I can reach out to them for a brief introduction and to set the expectations of the training material. Prior to the start of the pandemic, I would simply reach out to the new hiree at their new office phone number. However, with the new WFH changes, I would now reach out to mobile numbers and residential phone numbers. All in all, a very similar process to what I was doing before, just with the caveat of having to reach out to people at home. A bit easier, really. As per usual, I received a new spreadsheet with the names and info of the new hirees I needed to contact when I came across a quite unique name. I picked up my headset and dialed the number provided. New hiree. Hello, this is name. Me. Hi, good morning. This is me, calling from financial institution. Did I catch you at a good time? Yes, this is great. However, could you please call me at my landline? My mobile service is not very reliable in this area. I wrote down the phone number she provided and we hung up. Immediately, I dialed the phone number and waited for the dial tone. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. An older woman answers. Hello? Hi, good morning. My name is me, and I'm looking for new hiree. Can I speak to her? Sorry. Who are you? I'm me, calling from financial institution. She asked me to call her back on this line. Is she available? Silence. Hello? What do you mean she asked you to call her back? When? I was just talking to her and she said reception in the area is not very reliable and to please call her back at this number. I'm sorry, but that's impossible. Name of new hiree died 3 days ago. Is this telephone number provided by new hiree? Yes, that is correct. I'm sorry, I may have written down the number incorrectly. I apologize for the inconvenience and I'm very sorry about your loss. I hung up and was lost for words. I somehow managed to write down the wrong phone number and reached a residence with a recently deceased person who had the same unique name. I'm certain I wrote down the correct number, but it is possible that the poor connection made me write a different number. I don't know what to think. This is an odd coincidence, at the very least. I reached back out to the new hiree's mobile number and asked her to share the phone number again and confirm the number I dialed was correct. I was certain she would give me a different number where the digits were flipped and it might have just been a small dyslexia moment. I'm not so sure I was pranked by a family member, but it is possible that a senior resident with a mental disability might have answered and given me that info. Regardless, I didn't question the new hiree as it is none of my business if other residents live there and have access to the phone line. The next call I made back to her landline, the new hiree picked up, but it was the same number. Case notes, file number 541. I've realized this for a while now, how ghosts, the echoes of people's past, they're imprinted on a small geographic area of importance to them, well, to who they were. And these entities emit strong EM fields that can mess with, and sometimes, I believe, also control and influence electronic devices, such as phones. It wouldn't surprise me if this call was intercepted intentionally by whoever had passed away at that first address. No doubt they can alter the signal sent to the receiver, like 1 digit dialed. So you may have dialed the same number, but it was switched by this entity, or just intercepted. There's more to this than raw will, though. If it was as simple as it sounds, well, then these imprints would be messing with our phones all the time in order to talk to their loved ones who are still alive. Perhaps there are some sort of cosmic rules in place to limit how often they can do this. I don't know. I wonder how much it costs to use the phone as a ghost. Can't be that expensive, right? Bonus file, written by Karisti. Sometimes all you need is a good dream hug. In November, my dad had a hemorrhagic stroke, and it was pretty severe. He was awake for the first few days, then it was a constant up and down. On Thanksgiving, I got a call from the hospital that he had another stroke on the other side of his brain, and we needed to talk about end-of-life care. I had the first dream that night. We were sitting on his back porch at the table, and I was a sobbing mess. I kept saying that I couldn't believe he was going to leave me, and he kept laughing and making a joke out of it. He said, "What are you going to do about it?" And I told him I was going to climb in the casket with him. He laughed and reminded me that he was not going in a casket, he was going to be cremated. He passed away 3 days later. The second dream was a day or two after. I don't remember much except I was crying again and saying how much I missed him. I don't think he was hugging me back in this one, but I do remember him saying sorry and that it'll be okay. The third and final dream I had was very similar to the second one. I was ugly crying and hugging him, saying that I missed him and I can't believe he left me. This time he hugged me back and I could really feel it. It was such a good hug. It was so calming and made me feel loved. I stopped crying in my dream and just felt okay for the first time in weeks. I haven't had a dream like that since. I still dream about him, but it's so different from these 3 dreams. There's no feeling of sadness or talk of his death, just normal dream shenanigans. I know it's possible that it was just my brain trying to help me cope with the loss, but to me, it felt like he was checking in with me to see how I was and to say goodbye. I miss him so much. Every night I look forward to drifting off into dreamland in hopes of another hug from him. Creepy File number 12, written by Mammoth Permission 48, the so-called maintenance man. I'm a single male, 33, who lives alone in Denver. My apartment complex is not what you'd call a nice building. I'm on a road close to Colfax Avenue, which, if you're familiar with the geography of this area, is not the safest boulevard in town. I'm a few streets away from it, but close enough that I wouldn't consider this an up-and-coming neighborhood. This evening, I was watching Netflix on my couch. My 2 cats were cuddled up against me as I lay under a comforter. The night before, I had watched a horror movie that was scary enough to leave me in an unsettled mood, making it hard to sleep. So tonight, I decided to watch a stand-up special instead. Keep it light so I wouldn't have any trouble getting some shut-eye. I have classes early in the next morning, so I was surprised when I made the conscious decision to turn on a second stand-up special and let myself fall asleep on the couch. I was just so comfy where I lay and didn't want to move, not even to turn off the several lights on throughout my apartment. I remember dozing off around 11 o'clock. It was effortless, which meant I was really snug under the covers with my cats flanking me on either end, creating a tucked-in feeling. I fell into a dream wherein I was on an impromptu date with this guy, whom I didn't recognize, at a Blockbuster video store. He bought me blue and yellow underwear, like a Blockbuster would sell in Dreamland, insinuating I would take the hint of his intentions. He was also desperate for a job, so when we got to the counter, he was given an off-the-cuff interview that didn't go well. And all of a sudden, I'm not sleeping anymore. I'm woken up by a knock at my door. There's a man's voice and says, "Maintenance." I just sat there, sitting bolt upright on my couch. I knew something was off. I looked at my phone, which was by my left hand, and the time was 2:15 a.m. I didn't move. The floors in my apartment are old wood, and there are many creaky floorboards. I didn't want whoever was knocking to know someone was at home and awake, let alone alert to his presence. My cats got up and ran over to the door, as they normally would, but I stayed still and listened. After a few minutes with no answer, the man walked away from the door and down the hallway to the stairs. A moment after that, I heard the back door to the building swing open and closed. I have one window where I have a partial view of that door, so I break my paralysis and race over to it. I saw an old-looking green SUV sitting in the no parking zone just in front of the back door. It must have been running the entire time because I didn't hear it start up and the brake lights were glowing red. Someone, presumably the maintenance man, got in the car and drove it off. I don't know what his intentions were, but no one knocks on someone's door at 2:15 a.m. claiming to work for the landlord with good deeds in mind. Had it been a true emergency, wouldn't he have knocked again? Used his service key to get into the unit? What did I just avoid here? I can only assume it was an attempted robbery at best or abduction at worst. When I was watching the SUV drive off, I surveyed the other apartment windows. They were all dark. I can see every unit except the other 2 corner apartments below me from that vantage point. I think because my apartment sticks out from the building and has many windows, I was targeted because my lights were visibly on and noticeable from the street. However, I don't know how this individual got into the building in the first place, as you would need a key to do so. I've never been so legitimately afraid as a single person living alone. I'm grateful I installed a security chain on my door when I moved in. I'm also so glad that even in my disoriented state, I had the presence of mind not to move from the couch or make any noise. As I recount the event, I can't stop my eyes from watering a bit, though I wouldn't call it crying. My nerves are definitely shot. I don't think I'll be going back to Dreamland anytime soon. I have turned off all the lights save for the lamp by my bed. I usually can't sleep with it on. Tonight, I don't think I could sleep with it off. Case file number 542, written by What Effin' Time? The Boy with Glowing Green Eyes. My sister's mom, we'll call her T, told me a story about a time from when she was little, maybe 8 or 9. She and her sister, a little bit older than her, were walking home at night as the streetlights came on. They lived in a small town where pretty much everyone knew each other. As they were walking home, a boy, teenager, with glowing green eyes came out from behind a tree and was just staring at them. He had on a gray hoodie. He looked human, but had glowing green eyes. They both noticed, and she said they both just felt very uncomfortable. The boy starts walking towards them, and they start to panic, so they start running. The boy chases them, and he catches up with them and grabs onto T's arm. T and her sister begin struggling with him, and he's just growling the whole time like an animal while squeezing her arm. He even left a bruise. They finally got loose and ran as fast as they could to the nearest business. They ran inside and shut and pulled the glass doors behind them as tight as they could, but instead of pursuing them, he just stopped and turned around. They called their mother to come and get them and told them what happened. They called the police and they began searching for the guy, which she explained he shouldn't have been hard to find because the way the community is set up, there were only so many places he could go. There were woods nearby, but she said if he ran in the woods, he would have been caught because of the dead ends. She said they searched that whole town and he was never found. They even asked around town, this is a close-knit community, if anyone knew who he was, and no one knew him or saw him before, and he was unmistakable. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if anyone has a similar experience or knows who or what this could have been. Case notes, file number 542. Recently, I was put onto a new show on Amazon, simply titled Hannah. In it, a girl is raised by her father out in the woods, and he trains her to be self-reliant, strong. Of course, given she never leaves the forest for 16 years, the first time she does, she acts more like an animal from a normal human perspective. She even accidentally harms a boy she meets who was just trying to help her. I was thinking of the introduction of the show while reading this story. The fact he had piercing green eyes could be a coincidence, maybe even related to harsh and limited diet from growing up in the wild, which is what sounds like happened. Or was he something else entirely, not of this world? Bonus file, written by Mystery Chick 88, the decaying maw of a mouth that haunts my dreams. I do not know how she found me or why she hated me, but I will tell you the first time I ever saw her. I was dreaming I had entered into a small country pub. The ceilings were low and it had that musty smell of beer and thyme. Outside the windows was a quiet, rural lane surrounded by hedgerows and what looked like farmers' fields beyond that. It was a lovely warm day, but the scene was eerily quiet. There were 2 sections to the pub, one side which was devoid of anyone and what looked like to be a working bar, and the other side was closed off to the public and looked like it was being used to store old furniture. I found myself wandering around the furniture admiring a beautiful antique writing bureau when I suddenly felt disoriented. My legs started to give way as my head began to spin out of nowhere. My center of gravity was thrown out of whack and I stumbled onto the floor, and a fear I could not explain started to overcome me. I knew something was wrong and I had the feeling of being circled by a predator, one I could not see. In a state of panic, I shuffled back on the floor until my back made contact with something solid, an old dusty chest of drawers, and I tried to calm my breathing, not making any sense of why I felt like I was in so much danger. Then I heard a noise above me, a disturbing, croaky death rattle-like sound. I was terrified, but I found myself slowly raising my head to see what was there. I couldn't help it. I shouldn't have looked, but that macabre sound drew my attention like a moth to flame. Slowly leering over the top of the drawers directly above me, a face came into view looking down over me. It was a woman, strikingly beautiful if not cold-looking. Pale, blonde curls pinned on top of her head, icy blue eyes, young, no more than 30, but her mouth was what was the most terrifying part. It was stretched open into a gaping black hole with torn, cracked flesh stretching even further, making her face a disfigured, warped, horrifying mess. The rattling coming from within that cavernous abyss. I have never felt a fear like it. The sort which strips your brain of any normal function and sends your gut plummeting. I could barely scream. I was that scared. It was more like a high-pitched, hysterical whimper which barely left my mouth as her face came closer. Then I woke up sweating and still trying to scream. As disturbing as the dream was, I thought it was just that, a nightmare, although I have never been able to get her face out of my head all these years later. Roughly 6 weeks later, I had another nightmare in which I was involved in a vicious assault on the street outside my home. In this dream, the police came and I was being pinned to the ground and arrested with the assailants. I noticed a figure walking around the periphery of the circle of police and people. As my face was being pushed into the ground, it was hard to see who it was, but they were getting closer and closer to the tangle of bodies on the floor. As the police pulled me up, I saw it was a crooked old woman, bedraggled and dirty hair hanging in her face. It was full of debris and dirt. She was in an old-fashioned white nightdress. My stomach lurched, and although she looked different, I knew it was the same woman I had encountered in my nightmare weeks before. As if she sensed my realization, she rapidly lurched forward between the police holding me in place and sank her teeth into my arm and disappeared, leaving my arm an immediate septic mess crawling with maggots and decaying. The pain was what woke me up. I bolted upright, expecting to see teeth marks on my forearm as it throbbed, and although there were none there, the area was red as if I had been pinched. I suspected then that these were not ordinary dreams and that she was a separate entity, not some recurring imaginary figure. I didn't know yet that she was a witch, but the more she encroached into my dreams and life, the more I physically saw snippets of her. She had a knack for showing herself two different ways. One, the young beautiful woman, although never again with that hideous deformed mouth, and the other, a stereotypical hag. Every few weeks, I would encounter her in my dreams, which was where I figured out she was a dreamwalker, as I called this gift. Not sure if it's the correct term, a spirit or entity that can manipulate someone's dreams. In another dream, she was standing by my bed. She had her hands around my throat, slowly squeezing until I couldn't breathe. Then I woke up violently, gasping for breath. I had that same experience several times. Another time on my day off of work, I woke up and feeling lazy, decided to lounge in bed a little longer, in and out of sleep, until I became acutely aware of someone very close to me, staring at the back of my head. I knew it was her, and everything inside me screamed, "Do not turn around and look at her." So I stayed still, face pushed into my pillow. And then something peculiar happened. As if I was standing in the corner of my bedroom, I could see everything. Me lying in bed, covered up and face down, and hovering about 2 foot above my body, there was an opaque, brown, swirling humanoid mass. Other times I would dream she was hovering above me, and in a half-sleeping/awake state, too terrified to move, she would reach inside my chest, and I could feel an odd pressure around my heart, squeezing, causing it to beat out of rhythm. All I could do was lay there and pray that I didn't have a heart attack, as the thumping of my heart inside my chest would speed up rapidly, and then slow down, so there were seconds between each beat. I tried putting a protection boundary around my home, but it never seemed to keep her out. In the end, my spirit guides shut me down entirely to protect me from her. I guess being psychically open was what kept the link going between us. The complete radio silence I had for 3 years was eerie to say the least, and not something I was used to, as having random spirits popping in and out had been my way of life since I was 11 years old. It did the job. I didn't see her again for 3 years. When I became pregnant with my daughter, I unintentionally started to open up again. I only had 2 more experiences with her after this, although I was disheartened to know she was still linked to me. The night she showed herself again, she entered my dream as usual. I was laying in bed, and in this dream I woke and my quilt was hovering a few feet in the air above me. Through the gap in the dark between myself and the floating quilt, I could see someone shuffling around the edge of my bed, back and forth. The familiar feeling of fear that came with her held me in place, scared crapless out of what she was going to do next. To my absolute horror, the figure climbed underneath the hovering quilt at the foot of the bed and slowly worked its way over my body until she was on top of me and her face in front of mine. Her hair trailed across my skin and she smelt of damp earth. Then she spoke. "You thought I was gone," she hissed at me, and all I could do was try and scream myself awake. Suddenly the quilt dropped back into the bed and I bolted upright, finally awake. My quilt, which I usually cocooned myself inside, was stuffed down on the floor between my bed frame and the wall with the window that looked out into the street. I refused to sleep at my home the next night, telling my friend I couldn't believe she was back after all this time had passed. My last encounter I ever had with her was so odd to say the least, as it seemed as if she couldn't get as close to me as usual. Again in my dream, I awoke and she had me by the throat, both of us dangling in the air over my bed. She was her younger self, porcelain skin, fair hair, and all just staring into my soul as I struggled to breathe. I can't explain the look she had on her face. It wasn't anger, disgust, I don't know, just a cold indifference to me with maybe a hint of defeat. I felt different, and although I woke up struggling to breathe and with a sore neck, I don't think she had actually been inside the room with me. It was the last I ever saw of her, and hopefully ever will. I questioned myself early on whether it was a form of sleep paralysis, but I know that it wasn't, because of all the marks on my body. I have never suffered with it before or since, and that explanation just doesn't seem to fit. I suspect she was trying to stop my heart or physically scare me to death, but why? As I said, I saw glimpses of her life. I know she was a healer woman in a small community, but over time, she seemed to get treated with more suspicion and hatred, and shunned out of the area until she was living on the very periphery of society. Maybe once respected, then feared. I have no doubts she was immensely gifted in life, but unfortunately, she has passed over with them same gifts, fully understanding how to manipulate energy. Hands down, one of the few spirits which straight up terrified me. Case file number 543, written by Skyrim Fire Shout. My sister manifesting miracles. My little sister-in-law is 15 years old, and since 4 years ago, when we met, she has been all I can describe it as manifesting. There are always small details, but they happen so often that you can't ignore it. The first time I witnessed it was when our grocery delivery was postponed by 1 day. On the day it was postponed, my sister-in-law came up to me and said, "Wouldn't it be funny if our delivery got postponed again?" 2 minutes later, I got a phone call that their delivery guy had been slow on his route and will be getting ours tomorrow. Another instance was when we had a power cut and she walked by me and asked, "Hey, do you think our power will be out all night?" "I don't know, sister-in-law. We haven't heard anything about it at all." "Well, hopefully it comes back on real soon." And just as my sister-in-law says this, the power comes on as soon as she starts walking away from me. There was a time when we were sitting at the kitchen bench eating breakfast. She was researching chickenpox, and then she said, "Wouldn't it be funny if one of our nieces got chickenpox?" And about a day later, of course without fail, my niece's mom calls and asks my mother-in-law for an at-home itch remedy since niece has chickenpox. Okay, you can clearly see where I'm going with this. There was of course one event that shook me up the most. When I had started dating my significant other about 3 months in, my sister-in-law comes to me and says, "I hope you're still around in 2 years so my brother can name your daughter after me, because I'm special." In the way a child would joke, of course, and that was all it was to me. However, it stuck because of how innocent that statement seemed. I was diagnosed with infertility in my late teens due to chronic bacterial infections. Everyone who has qualified to make that decision came to the same conclusion. If I was to get pregnant, it'd be a miracle. And wouldn't you know, my sister-in-law, of course, wants to defy the odds. 1 week before mine and my significant other's second anniversary, my sister-in-law and I are having a casual conversation in the kitchen when she looks at me and says, "I would hate to be a mom and have to miscarry. That would be so sad. If you were to lose your bubba though, sis, I bet you'd get pregnant again straight away." And right on our anniversary, I find out I'm pregnant, but just like my sister-in-law manifested, I miscarry before I even get to my scheduled ultrasound. Obviously, my heart is broken, but I power through and ask my significant other if we can try for a baby again. The only thing I can do is keep track of my ovulation and hope for the best. It literally only takes us 2.5 months to get pregnant again, and I give birth to a girl to whom my significant other names after his little sister, even though we had disagreed throughout the whole pregnancy on the name. I wanted her to be named after my sister. I will say this to the day I die. There really is something special about her. Or maybe it's just a glitch in the matrix and she has somehow hacked the system. Take it however you want. It still freaks me out how accurate she can be sometimes. Or maybe how she can manifest miracles. Case notes, file number 543. Your sister-in-law has the tools downloaded into her mind. Like playing an MMO on developer mode, but without realizing you're in developer mode. As you mentioned, being infertile and diagnosed as such by multiple specialists, to get pregnant even once is a miracle, but twice? Any bookie would have taken that bet with 20,000 to 1 odds. I wonder how she feels, though. She must have realized by now that her instincts come true, perhaps only when verbalized? I wonder how often she thinks something and then it happens. If you haven't already, I would ask her more about it if I were you. Learn about this power because it has so many applications to safeguard your family and build a wonderful life, really. And congratulations on the miracle baby girl. Bonus file, written by Big One Tony. She's my daughter, but it's just a dream. I was never a guy that really believed in paranormal situations or anything, but something very strange happened to me this morning, and it still sends shivers down my spine. People may say I'm crazy, and maybe I am, but this is what it felt like to me. I am a 21-year-old with no kids. It's important to know the story. So I went with my dog for a walk this morning and was about to cross the street when I noticed a girl about my age staring at me from the other street, parallel to the one I was on. I first did not think a lot about it and kept going. Then I saw how she crossed the street to come to the one I was walking on while she was still staring at me. We crossed ways, and when she was closer, I could see her expression, and it was something like pity and nostalgia. It felt like she knew me from somewhere. Well, we crossed paths, but of course I did not stop to stare at her back. I just kept going. Then I turned to look at her once more, and she was still standing on the same spot I walked past her 5 seconds ago, and she was looking straight in my face with the same expression of pity. I continued walking, and after a few seconds, I turned again, and she was still there, staring at me with the exact same expression as the last time I turned back to look at her before I continued my walk with the dog. I don't know why or how, but a thought came directly into my mind, without any previous context. In my head, I was convinced that girl was my daughter, from the future, and she was looking at me that way because I died, and she was missing me. The whole day, I'm still really freaked out by this experience, and I thought about it. Look, my dad died when I was 7, and the night of his death, my mom dreamed he came into her dream and talked to her. He said he's okay and that she doesn't have to be worried about him. What if in my daughter's timeline, I died, and this moment was me in her dream, seeing her for the last time, like my father saw my mother for the last time in her dream? My father seemed to recognize my mother in the dream, and somehow I had that instant thought without previous context that that girl was my daughter. I recognized her instantly. I get shivers down my spine while I'm writing this. Like I said, I never had anything to do with paranormal things. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I never believed in ghosts, but I have no explanation for this. Maybe I am just crazy. I would like to read some opinions. Creepy File number 13, written by What an Effin' Time, the Walmart Voice. When I was about 15, I came out to my mom and we bumped heads so much that she sent me to Las Vegas to live with my dad, whom I've never met before. My dad is a minister and his wife is a pastor. I guess you could say it was her way of conversion therapy? I don't know. My dad and stepmom let me know all the time how much they didn't like me or my lifestyle. I went to church 3 to 4 times a week, and my dad would beat me all the time. He was so angry. I would call my mom and ask her to please bring me back. She wouldn't get me. One day, my dad and I got into a huge argument. He accused me of talking to girls and broke my phone. I had it, so I left. I stayed one night in the apartment complex with some older guy I used to hang out with, but he got weird, so I found some change and found a payphone to call my friend and ask if I could stay at her house. She said it was cool, but she had to sneak me in. I found a way over to her house and ended up getting kicked out because my stepmom called her grandmother looking for me, and her uncle comes upstairs saying he doesn't allow unpleasant word in his home. It was about 9 p.m. at this point. I had no clue where I really was, where I was going, or how I was going to get anywhere, so I just walked. I walked for hours until I found something that looked remotely safe, in my child mind. I found a neighborhood Walmart. I was exhausted. It was around 2 a.m., so I sat at a picnic table in the front and dozed off. I will never forget this voice, but someone screamed, "Wake up." I immediately jumped up and turned around, and there were 2 men about 3 feet away from me. They paused as I looked up at them, trying not to seem frightened. One of them breaks the silence with a weird smile and says, do you know if the store is open?" I was confused and said, "Yes, I think it's 24 hours. They didn't say anything else and just walked away. To this day, I have no idea whose voice that was that said, "Wake up," but I will never forget it. All I can think about is why were 2 men walking up to a sleeping child at 2 to 3 a.m. asking if a store was open they could just walk into, and how it seemed I woke up in just the right amount of time to prevent God knows what. Case file number 544, written by Mystery Chick 88, an eerie, crackling time reset. Let me just clarify before I start. I am completely sound of mind, and I've not shared this publicly until now, as I couldn't really handle negative comments. I just want some closure, I guess. So here it goes. I have always been into the paranormal as a kid. I was completely fascinated by it, and I found over the years the more open to it you are, the more downright bizarre some of the stuff you experience is. This tops my list of weird experiences. Roughly 4 years ago, my sister came to my flat one night to spend a bit of time with me as we both had been working like crazy and hadn't had the time to catch up. It was just the 2 of us, and she suggested having a game of cards, something we have always done since we were kids. It's a favorite pastime in our house. Once I had gotten the cards out and started shuffling them, she asked me to look at the time on my phone as she had to work the next morning at 7 a.m. and needed to be home in a reasonable time. She had lost her phone on a night out a few days previously, a terrible habit that she has. I told her it was 6:10 in the evening. She replied, "Okay, well, I'll have to be getting off around 8:30, 8:45 to get my uniform washed and dried, so keep an eye on the time for me." I agreed, and we started playing a bit of rummy to start with. Now, we weren't drinking alcohol or taking any drugs. We were just having a relaxed game of cards, chatting about guys and work. The usual stuff, I suppose. Everything was normal. We played cards for what felt like 2 hours easy. I mean, you can't mistake that length of time when you have about 16 to 18 hands of rummy, and we're in the early stages of playing a game of poker, having got bored of the other game. I remember having the weirdest feeling come over me, like the light in my room dimmed, and I distinctly felt an electrical, crackly feeling start in the bottom of my spine and creep all the way up to my skull. I looked at her, and she was looking at me, all wide-eyed and silent, like she knew something was up. I blurted out, "Something is wrong, really very wrong." Without blinking or reacting in any other way, she just says to me, "Look at the time," which I thought was strange. I picked up my phone and looked at the time. A mixture of shock and dread creeps over me. that can't be right. It's not possible. I mumbled out loud, to myself if anything. My phone must have glitched out or something. Getting up to turn the telly on to see what the time is on there. She's looking at me like, what the hell's going on? What is it? What's the time? She asked me again. I just repeat that it can't be right, and as I switch the telly on, the time flashes up in the corner of the screen. It said 6:29 p.m. She sees it and is now just as freaked out as I am. Amy, that can't be right. Did you see your phone say the same time? I told her it did. I pull out a laptop to check the time and even get a watch out of my drawer to see if they all got matched up, and sure enough, they did. We just sat there in a bit of a fog like, what on earth had just happened? We tried to discuss it, but we couldn't make any sense of it. To be honest, it felt uncomfortable. Even to this day, to talk about it, it doesn't feel right. She breaks the silence with a joke, something like, oh well, at least I have another couple of hours to chill with you. We just tried to forget about it. I just wondered if anyone had any ideas as to what it is. Case notes, file number 544. This description you have, how unnerving it felt at the time, like the whole room was crackling with energy, even feeling it in your spine. I felt those words myself reading this. My brain is trying to recreate the scene for myself. A total, all-consuming atmospheric change. Your whole body's senses telling you this is not right. So here's the thing. We know that time travel to the future is not only possible, but we technically do it all the time. Any increase in our velocity, relative to each other or other bodies in the universe, results in our timeline curve stretching more into the spatial category. The way I like to think of it, we have a certain number of balls, and by default, all the balls are placed in the time bucket. That is to say, the default is traveling through space-time purely in the time part. But if we add kinetic energy and start moving through space, changing our inertia, we remove some balls from the time pool and put them into the space pool. Now we're moving more through the space part of space-time. And the more energy we put into moving through space, the more balls we take from the time category. At low kinetic energy states like we live every day, not much happens. Very few balls are removed from the time pool. But put enough energy in and you can, almost, remove all the balls from the time pool, which effectively means that relative to other bodies in the universe, you're barely moving through time. But this really only happens when you get to really quick speeds, like we're talking significant fractions of the speed of light. This can also happen by being close to extreme sources of gravity, like black holes. Think of the movie Interstellar, Miller's Planet. They go down for merely hours and come back to the ship where 23 years had passed. They had removed so many balls from their time bucket, they had barely moved forward in it at all, relative to the rest of the universe. And that relativity part is really what befuddles the brain the most. The fact that the universe doesn't have any absolute time. There is no now everywhere. It's all relative. I honestly still struggle to intuitively incorporate that into my mind, like it doesn't make sense. It does, but it's weird. It's incredibly strange. It's how Einstein felt, no doubt. So how can we all apply this to your glitch? What on earth could have created a reverse effect? Not slowing time for you, but literally emptying the time bucket entirely and somehow adding in negative time to reverse it. I have no theories on that. It would actually violate causality. Now, I will say the classic A word, aliens. We certainly as humans don't have any ability to go back into time, or even a viable theory as to how it could be possible. Yet that happened to you and your sister, so there's no mistaking this for absent-mindedness. I do love glitches like this, where there's more than one witness. It really confirms that something incredible happened. Now, was it aliens, or some freak weather event? I don't know, some effect of the universe that is so rare that it almost never happens? Honestly, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. But it is an incredible story. Case file number 545, written by Carlo Sestaro. Airl, the alien. I am 24 years old, and since I was born, I was always interested in the philosophy of the mind, religions, and why they exist. And I always was a rational, scientific person, until when I was 23 years old. Little backstory first. My vision has always been extremely good. never wore glasses or lenses, always a very visual person. One of those guys who constantly stops to look at trees because, like many of you I'm sure, I recognize the sacredness in everything. I was always quite spiritual after that, without even knowing what the spirit even is. I always felt also that my sessions of free thinking were guided by someone that was not me. Since when I was a kid, I always used my imagination, and I was always interested in the first-person experience, because I feel like the realms of philosophy and religion and science will one day merge. So since I was a kid, I always used my mind for what it is, a viewer. I always felt kind of guided in my thinking. I would see images, concepts, answered to questions I had about society and religion, and so on. I always felt like I knew something else before my birth, but never paid much attention to these thoughts, telling myself they were not real. When I was 21, I finally started to take meditation more seriously, and my exploration into my mind received a great upgrade. At 23 years old, I started to realize that the UFO phenomenon, to which I always felt attracted to, was probably real, and one day I was discussing this with my family at a dinner. Of course, the members of my family were kind of surprised by the subject because they always saw me as a very serious, smart person. And UFOs are for crazy people, right? According to popular belief. So mentally, I told my guides in my mind, I said, if you really exist, and I'm not talking to myself right now, that means you can listen to this. And if you can listen to this, you can show yourself to me. Now, if you do, I will give my life to this cause. If you do not, I will get a family, and I will presume that I should do what my human peers tell me. Materialize on this physical plane so I can see you with my eyes, or the party is over and I will forget you forever. Next morning, I was up at 4:30 in the morning. I didn't use cannabis the night before, so I was completely sober, no drugs. I went upstairs and made myself a coffee with the intention of working out. I started to walk towards the park, and not even a minute into the walk, I saw my first UFO in my life. It was 5:02 in the morning of the 23rd of September of 2021, and my heart started racing because I knew they were them, my guides. I saw these 4 lights in the sky flying very fast in formation. Then the formation broke and they spiraled among themselves and disappeared one after the others. Extremely fast, extremely close, almost magical. Absolutely no sound at all, and it couldn't be a satellite. I always look up and always know what I'm looking at. After some months of realizations, I asked them in my head to give me the answers of what this place, Earth, is, and they told me mentally, Alien Interview from Roswell Crash, written by Matilda. I didn't know the book or its title before asking, of course. They didn't tell me this with words, but with images. I found the book and read it, and I was floored. I still don't know if these aliens are manipulating us and me, and they're actually enemies, but they are so subtle and they respect our free will so much that they don't give me this impression. It feels like they want to help us all. In the book, they basically told us that we are immortal spiritual beings and that we are trapped here because we are imprisoned. You cannot kill one like us, you can only trap them. In the book, my favorite quote is, I sense your disbelief about you being a spiritual being. You want the proof of that? Be above your head now. For the first moment of my life, I realized the obvious. I am not my head or my body. I became aware that Airl, the alien, is an immortal spiritual being, and so are we all. Basically, according to Airl, we cannot remember our past lives because the people controlling Earth make us go towards a light that erases your spiritual awareness. And then on Earth, through mind control and false memories installed by the people we love, they ensure we cannot remember who we are or where we come from. Read the book before dismissing it, as it is written in the preface, what is true for you is true for you. You need to make up your own mind. But I know my own experiences have gone to shape my beliefs.